the governments in most countries get emailed in their policies from the mining companies. The governments are owned by the mining companies. That's the reality. And even if they're not technically owned, once the mining company can say, I can give you growth, I can give you 5 years of jobs, anything for I'll destroy the Sperrins for 5,000 years if I can get 10 years of jobs. That's the type of politicians we have. That's their model of thinking. That's how far they see ahead. So the only protection is the community.
Welcome to the Save Our Sperrins campaign, Voices from the Frontline. I'm Morella Fife, your host and a member of the Save Our Sperrins team. At the heart of this struggle are the voices of local people, farmers, families and young campaigners whose homes, work and families are rooted in this place. Their voices are joined by supporters from across the world, standing in solidarity, from professors to artists, from those offering vast expertise to those whose presence alone is an act of support. All have stood with us. In this series, we share stories of resistance, resilience, and hopes from those determined to protect these mountains, their land, their rivers, the very air they breathe, and their community. Let's get started. Today's guest is someone who's been digging deep into one of the least spoken about aspects of the climate emergency, the global mining industry. Gerry McGovern is a writer, activist, podcaster and public speaker. His work has consistently highlighted the hidden costs of extraction, not only on our climate, but on communities and ecosystems across the world. He is the host of the excellent podcast After the Goldrush, and he has a forthcoming book that examines the negative impacts of mining, particularly the so-called green metals, with a chapter that also turns its gaze towards gold mining here in the Sperrins. I was eager to sit down with Gerry to explore these ideas further, so let's get started. Gerry, you're very welcome to Save Our Sperrins podcast. It's a real pleasure to have you on with us here today. To begin, could you tell us a little bit about who you are and where you're speaking to us from today, and perhaps share also a little bit about how you came into the kind of writing that you do and what has brought your attention to the link between mining and the climate emergency? That's a big question.
Big question. Well, I was born in Longford and moved to Dublin as a student, as many did, around the beginning of the 1980s, and basically, did a number of things, became a freelance journalist, music journalist, stuff like that. Had a lot of interest in writing, but in the mid-90s, maybe about 93, 94, I came across the World Wide Web very early on.
Very good.
And I sent in a letter to a government department saying you should do a report on this thing, called the web, just on the off chance, and they accepted. They says, yeah, go and do it, basically. So that started a journey from about 93, 94 onwards, focused on the web, and quite a bit of success. We had a company that got the top award in Europe in 1996 for web innovation, and we had social media sites that what was known then as Aircom invested into. So we had a lot of success, and then went bust in 2001 with the big dot-com bust. But all that time I was focused on not so much the technical side. I have an understanding of it, but it's not a deep one, but more on content and data. So I started focusing even more on organising content and organising data, and I ended up writing about 7 or 8 books on the subject, and I'd travel around the world a lot. I'd say I've worked in about 40 countries or spoken, and so I was a kind of specialist in managing data and managing content. And then around maybe, I don't know, around 2017 or so, around the time of Greta Thunberg, I thought, wow, she's an amazing young person, and maybe there's something interesting I could do over here in the digital space that could be more environmentally friendly. And so I started. I didn't think there would be, because I believe the hype that digital is in the cloud and that it's ethereal and doesn't really have an impact. And so I started investigating things, and the more I investigated, the more I discovered. I came across a fascinating scientist called Josh Lebowski, and at that stage I was interested in e-waste, because e-waste is the fastest growing waste stream in the world and extremely toxic. So I was digging into what happens with that. And so a lot of reasons why we're not so aware of it is we dump our e-waste in the global south. So a lot of the e-waste in Europe, or North America, ends up in Ghana or Nigeria or India, places like that. So I was interested in that, the physicality and the damage that was doing. And Josh Lebowski had written about that, but he said, if you're interested in waste, let me tell you that mining waste is 100 times bigger than e-waste. The quantity and the damage it does. And I couldn't believe that. I thought, wow, that can't really be true. So that started a journey, and then I published a book called Worldwide Waste in 2020, more about the digital waste and the e-waste. I was only beginning to learn about the mining waste, but since then, since about 2020, I've focused an awful lot on mining waste, particularly of these so-called green metals. And lithium and nickel and cobalt and aluminium and stuff like that. So I started doing a lot of investigations in that, and my wife is Brazilian, so we'd spent quite a bit of time in Brazil, and there's a state in Brazil that's called Minas Gerais, which means General Mines. The state is just called General Mines, and it has some of the worst mining accidents in history, Brumadinho and Congonhas and Mariana and so loads of damaging stories of what mining does there. So I went to a lot of dumps there and saw the scale of the stuff. And where I'm speaking to you now is we had retired, I planned to retire, because I lived most of my life in Ireland, but I was found the climate very cold, and I find it cold as well. So we planned to retire in Spain. So I'd moved to, we're speaking to you now from Valencia in Spain. But so then I discovered the whole history of Spanish mining, the Rio Tinto. So I went to the Rio Tinto area and talked to a lot of activists, and but also I had been researching in Ireland and the basically Ohinishaluna, Patanula gig, and I spoke to that. So I did a lot of investigation about where aluminium came from and how it, the bauxite was mainly found under tropical forests, and how I discovered as well that some of the bauxite for Ohinishaluna came from the Amazon. So I was able to tie some stories with Brazil and Ireland and Ghana and stuff like that. And as that was all happening, I heard about the gold mining and the issues in the Sperrins, and decided to cover it, even though it's not a green metal, so to speak. It's not, so to speak, in quotation marks. It has been used by governments to claim it is, that we have to mine it because of the transition or whatever. Just more lies and coming out. So basically, I've spent the last 5 years investigating mining and the impacts of mining waste, and talking to lots and lots of people, and digging into the history of metals. And I did a lot about the history of gold and the impacts throughout history, and the history of Roman mining in Spain. So yeah, that's basically a potted history.
Yeah, and a great overview of what you've been up to. And I confess, until I thought I knew a little bit about mining, and until I came to your podcast and started listening about the waste problem and so on, and the vastness of it and the scale of it, I was just gobsmacked. I just couldn't get over it. So that's my reason for having you on here.
Well, I was 6 or 12 months ahead of you. that's like, to me, I couldn't believe it. Like this, it was just, so I probably just discovered that stuff 6 months before, 12 months before, certainly not much longer. And it was like when I started off, and and somebody said, "Oh, there's," because aluminium can be a quarter of a phone or a laptop's material, and I thought, how will I find out about aluminium? And then somebody told me, do you not know there's a huge plant in Limerick? What? Like it was like, it was, I could, so yeah, they do a lot to hide.
They do. They're very good at hiding.
They're very good at hiding. It's all a game. And one of the things talking about hiding, what I discovered about the digital industry is one of the best ever at hiding. That in the 50s in Silicon Valley, when Silicon Valley was emerging, it was essentially a chip manufacturing area, and they wanted to create this impression of a big break between the old dirty smokestack industries. So they made it a rule that all the chemical tanks, there's about 400 chemicals in chip manufacturing, right? So there's huge quantities of chemicals. So they mandated that all the chemical tanks had to be put underground.
Huh.
Wow. So and of course, when you put those chemical tanks underground, they're going to leak.
Of course they are. Yeah.
So within 15 or 20 years, Silicon Valley was the most toxically polluted place in the United States.
There you go.
And of course, then what they did was they shifted it offshore. They came to Ireland, or they came to other countries in the process to shift the problem away, Taiwan and places like that. So, they're always hiding the harms,
Oh, that's fascinating, Gerry. And we really have no idea what's going on globally. It's taken people like yourself and the work that you do and pulling that together and bring it in front of local people to say, this is what's happening, and we have to do something if we want to have a planet to live on for people going forward in the future. As I said in an earlier podcast sometime this week, we were literally shitting in our own nest. And
oh yeah, totally. But no, we're actually shitting in a poor person's nest.
That's true.
We keep our nest reasonably clean, but we go over and shit in a poor person's, and then we think that the shit won't leak into the river, that we end up drinking. I discovered one story very briefly so we dump huge quantities of e-waste in Africa, and particularly in Ghana. What has started happening is that the e-waste is, there are hundreds of materials in a phone, some extremely toxic. They're leaking into the water. The water is travelling through the rivers, it's going to the sea, it's being picked up, it's been getting into the plankton, it's been eaten by the fish. Then the European trawlers are coming to the African coast, trawling the fish, bringing it back to Europe. So basically, there's a good chance you're eating a piece of the smartphone you had 5 years ago in the fish, or the others. So it's actually coming back, people's nests.
Yeah.
Shit overflows, and it goes into the air, goes into the water. So we had this idea that we could just outsource. I have this quote from a person who is one of the founders of the Royal Society, and they had a big problem, 1700s to 1800 in England, with their forests being cut down for building the ships and for the steel making that was emerging. And this guy, there's a quote from this guy, he says, better to mine in New England so that we'll save old England.
Yeah. It's still the whole colonial attitude, isn't it?
Totally, it's never changed. It's the same issues of, there's now this stuff like data colonialism, where we're putting, like in Ireland, do you think all the data in the data centres in Ireland is for Irish people.
Yeah.
If 2% of it is. So we're using Irish water and Irish electricity to serve data to Germans and to Brits and to French people. But the same is happening in Mexico, the same is happening in Brazil. They're beginning to place the data because the water is very scarce, etc. But somebody did this mapping, and they saw that the data cables that cross the Atlantic follow the exact same line as the slave ships that used. So it's the same type of colonialism. It's just, how do we extract stuff from someplace else so that we'll have the conveniences where we are, and we think that that's just going to go on infinitely, and we can destroy Brazil and mine and destroy, the Andes for the lithium, and we just think we can do it. But it's coming around. It's coming around, and we'll pay a big price. Our children will.
We'll pay a big price. Yeah. Okay. What price our well-being is what comes to my mind. Our health and well-being. What's that worth? Let's move it on a little bit. Some folk would argue that mining is essential for the green transition, while others would see it as a deepening of the climate crisis. Where would you position mining within this wider climate debate?
Let's start with the green transition. No such thing. Right? Doesn't exist. It's a con, it's a scam. Right? Number one, there's never been an energy transition. There's never... coal has never replaced wood. They were cutting down more trees in Britain for the coal shafts in the 19th century than they burned in wood in the 18th century. So they were consuming more wood to build coal mines. So there's this sort of interrelationship between energies. They feed off each other in the process. And a Chinese electric car takes about 2 to 3 tons of coal to make, in the process. So there never has been an energy transition. It's just more. They feed off each other and they grow off each other. And green? How can you say that lithium mining is green or cobalt mining is green? Or, it's like this idea of renewable technologies is like saying you're half a virgin.
Or you're only a little bit pregnant.
You're only a little bit pregnant, in the process, right? Okay, the sun is renewable, but the wind turbine, you don't, in autumn, those wind turbines, they don't have buds, and the buds fall off, and then in spring, little baby wind turbines grow, and when the wind turbines die, they nurture the soil. When they die, their toxic blades are actually dumped, because most of them can't be recycled. It takes huge quantities of rare earths for wind turbines. So 1 gigawatt of wind turbine energy is 600,000 tons of toxic, often radioactive, rare earth waste. But that's okay, because that rare earth waste is in Myanmar, killing the people in Myanmar, or it's in Mongolia. The lithium is destroying the Andes. So the green transition is a total fraud, con, and scam. It's a diversion, because we don't focus on the right problem. The problem is not an energy production problem. The problem is an energy consumption problem. We consume vastly too much. And these solar panels. Why are solar panels cheap? They're cheap because slave labour. They're being made by Uyghur slaves in China. The nickel in them is destroying Indonesia. The lithium in them is destroying the Andes. So it's all a con and a scam, just to keep this idea that we can keep growing and the economy and all of those sorts of things. So it's a total scam. The green transition, and the fact, like I talked to environmentalists, or Jacinta Van Rose was one of them, and she was at a meeting with Eamon Ryan at one stage many years ago in Clare, and he said at one stage there'll be mining in Clare, and you know what, the Greens clapped. There'll be mining. What has happened to the environmental move, large parts of it?
Yeah.
Have they been bought out? Have they been taken over by the techie cult of there's a new technology that's going to solve this problem. It's at least let's focus on the right problem.
Yeah.
It's not energy production, it's energy consumption. We consume vastly too much energy, and it doesn't matter whether that's coming through solar or whether it's coming through wind. They all just have different harms, and the harms are massive and they're growing. So it's a fraud and it's a scam, the whole green transition.
Gerry, how should we be thinking about consumption apart from reducing it? That's the number one. It's very difficult.
It's very difficult.
Here we are, exactly because of these rare earth metals, we're able to talk with each other and communicate this. And if it hadn't been for those, I wouldn't have known about you in the first place. How do we, I know we need to write a new story about it.
This time won't last, Mara. This is a moment in time. So we won't be doing this in 50 years. This all collapsed. I'm totally convinced we are headed towards an enormous societal collapse.
I agree with you. Even if the companies continue to make money and the corporations around the world, but climate change will catch them up. The climate emergency, it'll put a stop to it.
And it's not just climate change; it's ocean acidification.
The outfall of all of that, Yeah.
So the future will be a lot like how we lived in the 16th century or the 17th. So we're going to have to learn again to live locally. We're going to have to learn again to live with the materials we can find locally, with the energy we can find locally. It may take it 100 years, it may take it 200 years, it may take it 300 years to pan out. Another really fascinating person on this subject is Tom Murphy, who's an astrophysicist. He's done a lot of work in this area. So we gotta build resilience locally. Our future generations will be living locally. This idea of me speaking to you, this will be a blip. So hopefully we're doing this right here and now to warn people and to say, build resilience, teach your children how to sow and grow crops and to understand what vegetables grow locally, what plants grow locally, because only those who understand the local environment and who understand, you said something earlier about communities, the only vehicle of change will be the community. The higher ups are elites, right? So I've been in 40 countries and I've been with quite important people. They're all the same, whether they're German, they all think that they have rights much greater than everybody else. They're all a model of a human being. They're neither German or French. They're greedy. They want power. So once you get up to these levels of power, they'll protect themselves way more than they'll protect the people that they're supposed to represent. So the only protection will be found in the local community. And that's the only movement, that's the only place that has not been bought out by big tech and the other concerns, because it's awkward and difficult to buy it out. It's not that it's impossible, but there are so many local communities. It's much easier to buy 20,000 elites than 4 billion people.
Yeah. I feel myself, we have to move away from an economy that's based on success. You're seen as a successful person if you get a good job and you earn thousands or whatever, you have a nice car, you have a nice house, and that is their success. Boom. And we need to move the economy from that as being as a sort of a measure of success to a well-being economy, where well-being is put at the core of everything, and the dollar economy falls away. And I think that's where we have to start.
Totally. I mean, that's it. That's the plan.
Yeah.
And the well-being of everything. The well-being of the
yes, all beings everywhere.
This idea that it was the entrepreneurial individual that's the big lie. All of the crucial things that matter to us, whether it's language or dance or they were all communally developed in the process. The foods, one things I discovered about most of the crops of the most successful crops, from maize, tomatoes, potatoes, sweet potatoes, were created by indigenous people in South America. But who were they created? They were actually created by women. Because it was women who were the keepers of the seeds, etc., in the process. But all of that, and in a communal type of environment. So all of these crops, which have never been bettered, the tomatoes and the sweet potatoes, were developed through communal female organisation and the power of the community. So the community has had very bad marketing and branding, but it is where, if we're going to survive, the secrets will be found.
Yeah, I agree. Some years ago I was involved in teaching organic gardening and the organic centre down in Leitrim. It's good, going back a good while, but I was astonished to find back then that corn, it was illegal to sell corn seeds in some parts of Central and South America because GM corn was being sold on either side, and I just thought that was outrageous. I just thought, how can anyone do that to a food supply for human beings?
From the place that
that's right.
Give birth to these.
There were farmers being put in prison for doing it.
That's the greed. That's the greed, and that's where we've got to, and that's called progress.
Yeah.
And we reward those psychopaths, whether they're Zuckerberg or Musk, or Trump, with the highest positions in the world. So that's where we are, and it won't last.
Yeah. Thankfully, it won't last. We know that everything changes all the time, so we can be sure of that.
but these people are so inherently corrupt that they never create anything that really lasts, because the greed devours everything.
Yeah. Let's move on. I know your forthcoming book also turns to gold mining. Can you tell me a little bit more about your book and when it's coming out and so on? And there is a section, I believe, about the Sperrins campaign in it. And what made you want to include our story, and how do you see the Sperrins fitting into this wider global picture? So just...
The book hopefully will be out about February, and it's a story of mining in Ireland, in Brazil, and in Spain, and also a fourth section on how all of these materials feed into the technological world we built, from artificial intelligence to Bitcoin and computers and all of that. So it's hopefully a story of resistance of communities, at the Sperrin of which is an amazing example of communities coming together to resist these forces, to find a way in the most difficult of circumstances to stand up against these relentless mining oligarchs, and that's basically it's. I hope I do a lot of interweaving of indigenous thoughts and ideas, and it's not that I have a chapter that says all were indigenous once. That basically, most of us, our grandparents, our great grandparents, were indigenous, being of the land, loyal to the land, respecting the land, loving the land, caring the land, looking after the rivers, seeing the mountains as a mother, sort of stuff. So there's a lot of stuff there about indigenous thought, the best indigenous thought about how to get back to some degree to a model that is truly sustainable in the process. So the basic concept is collapse is coming, but it's the civilization. It doesn't have to be the collapse of life. The civilization won't last. No civilizations last. All civilizations have ultimately devoured themselves. Whether the same in South America, they were imperialist. The Mayas and the Incas and the Aztecs were imperialist. civilization. So as we became more sophisticated, we became civilized, you know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but all of those civilizations ultimately devour themselves. But this devouring is going to be on a scale we have never before seen, because it's a globalized civilization. And the question now is what comes after. I think so. The book is to some degree about what comes after and how we prepare, like you said, a story. We need new stories, which are old stories to some degrees, you know, about well-being and those sorts of issues, rather than greed and the profit motive. And you know, one thing I noticed, I read a lot of Indigenous literature, was the fear of the great man. A lot of them had all these structures in place to downplay the emergence of leaders.
Oh, right.
You know,
Right.
Clearly, because they would have had experience over tens of thousands of years. You know, a lot of Indigenous cultures were matured through failure. You know, they got it wrong multiple times.
Yeah.
And then they learned from those mistakes. But one of the greatest fears of Indigenous cultures is the emergence of the great man.
That's so interesting. I've never heard that before, but it makes a whole lot of sense.
And you know, and you see that in you know, with some European philosophers as well, Kotler and whatever, that you know, that the emergence of the great. And I think when I looked at it all, I thought, what's the root cause of all this? And I think the root cause of all this is men, is the imbalance of men in society, that men are no longer are part of society. They've come to dominate society, or a certain, and of course people say not all men, of course not all men, you know, that's a trivial response. But the kind of the imbalance of a certain type of macho man, which has, you know, sucked up all the power and wealth and the greed, and has a kind of defined human culture in a way which is really defining a certain type of highly testosterone type of aggressive type of man, that this is human culture. No, it's a type of man that has come to dominate society. And if we don't bring men back into balance, I don't think any model will succeed.
The feminine energy has to equal the masculine energy.
I think
It's not that way at the minute.
No, of course not. It's a balancing of the female energy with the male energy, with the river's energy, with the mountain's energy, with the trees' energy. It all has to work in a certain type of balance. But today, you say that to most men. Like, I was telling the story about the seeds and some 2 or 3 men, and I told them, you know, it was women who did this, because women were the keepers of the seed, women were the agriculture. They said, that's not true. They didn't have a fact in their head about this subject, didn't know anything about the subject until I told them about it. But they knew it couldn't be women that did that, because how could women have created the tomato? How could women have created the sweet potato? No, that had to be a man, because all the important things are created by men. You know, so that was the immediate. That's not true. How you know nothing about this subject? How can you tell me it's not true? Because I'm a man. I know.
Can we get your book when it's published?
Well, it'll hopefully, you know, be available in shops. The idea is about February, that it'll be probably January, February. I've almost finished it now at the moment. It's going to be called 99th Day. Which is, and the subtitle is a warning about technology in the process. So it should be available in all the usual outlets. My intent is that it won't be available in places like Amazon.com or those, but you know,
the usual places.
There'll be a bit of publicity hopefully in Ireland about it when it's ready.
Okay, so we'll get that out amongst our listeners when it comes out, or maybe we'll get you back on again for a quick update around it.
That would be lovely.
Okay. Some people argue that mining could be carried out more responsibly with better technology and tighter regulation, while others believe we need a much deeper rethink of how we use and demand resources. Where do you stand on that spectrum?
Well, mining every year becomes worse for the environment, right? And technology might make the workers safer, but it destroys the environment at a much greater scale, because you're talking about open pit mining, etc. But you've basically got a core problem, a fundamental problem in mining connected with ore ratio. So if you were mining a ton of copper in 1920, you would create about 30 tons of waste.
Okay.
Because the ore to soil or rock ratio was quite high.
Mm-hmm.
But we've mined all the good places to get the lithium, to get the, well, maybe not so much the lithium because it's a new metal, but to get the copper. Today, if you're mining copper, a ton of copper is about 180 tons of waste. So it's gone from 20 tons, 30 tons of waste to 100, because the ore ratio, and the ore ratio goes down every year. So what that means is mining will only become more damaging. And also what happens is, if you say got a lump of pure coal or steel, you just come in with some sort of a machine and you dig it out.
Uh-huh.
But if you've got copper lightly spread across 180 tons,
okay,
how do you get that out? The only way you can get it out is with chemicals.
Okay.
So the future of mining will be more and more damaging to the environment, because the nature of mining is changing as the ore quality declines, and the only way to get those ores is through chemical or churning or bringing that back into big pits where it's somehow processed and the stuff is separated. So again, it's a lie told by the mining industry. Mm-hmm. Do they ever tell anything other than lies? So mining gets worse every year from an environmental point of view, and and that's how it will be, and that's how it'll continue to be. But even people say recycling, and yeah, recycling is a good idea, but recycling is not zero damage.
Mm-hmm.
There's no such thing as infinite recycling. It's a wear and tear. There's energy used in recycling. So you get melt loss, etc. So you're never going to answer the problem with recycling, particularly when you've got a growth-driven economy. Uh-huh. So we're just on this. One of the themes I talk about in the book is called the growth debt cult. Uh-huh. We're essentially in a debt cult, and we're all, from the UN, everyone's bought in. Uh-huh. It's just a global debt cult that growth can't be questioned.
Yeah.
Growth.
Yeah. Going for growth. Yeah.
It's like what you said earlier, the dollar and the well-being. So growth is killing us, killing everything around us.
Yeah, and we know, like, if we develop a cancer ourselves, that's just something that keeps growing and growing and growing and growing, and then ends up eating us. And precisely as you said, we'll end up eating our civilization. Will end up eating itself.
We're eating itself. Yeah. We're for a few conveniences, and these new technologies, artificial intelligence, the damage it's doing, and for such a poor technology, and the amount of water that's required, the ChatGPT is talking about setting up data centers that'll consume as much electricity as New York. like this is like insane.
Yeah.
Just for greed. It's not even a good technology. It's unstable, it's unreliable, it's extremely bad for our children. It's designed for addiction.
Yeah.
It's totally designed to target children and old people and people with mental illnesses and create addiction, and then to sell those people on to advertisers. That's the core purpose of AI. I've been studying artificial intelligence since the 1980s. And the new version of AI is set up by advertising companies, Google and Facebook, to target children, old people, people with mental illnesses, and to turn them into addicts that they'll sell to advertisers. So we're using all this electricity, all this water, all these materials to create addicts to make Zuckerberg and Musk a bit richer.
Yeah. It's a sad situation we've arrived in for such an intelligent species that we are.
Well, I think, Morella, intelligence is the dangerous thing.
True.
Is that if we had a lot less intelligence, we'd be a lot less dangerous.
Yeah.
So we assume that there's a connection between intelligence and morality and intelligence and goodness.
Not so.
But it's often the very opposite.
Yeah.
That intelligence leads to this arrogance and this hubris and this, I can do whatever I want. So I think intelligence is our downfall, ironically, because it has smothered the wisdom.
Yeah.
The need for wisdom, which is an entirely different way of being and different way of thinking. So, yeah, I used to think, we're so intelligent, but, that's the danger. Intelligent people are the really dangerous people.
Intelligence without wit.
It's just a recipe for collapse.
Yeah. I'd like to switch focus now back to yourself a little. You've shared many of these insights before in your own podcasts and After the Goldrush, and I thought that was a really excellent series. And for our listeners, if you really want to get into the nitty-gritty of what's happening in the mining world, I suggest you have a listen to Gerry's podcast, which will be in the show notes. I'll have the link to the show notes at the end of this podcast. Can I gently ask you, Gerry, what led you to stop producing it, and do you see yourself returning to podcasting in the future?
Well, I thought that of course you can never tell the whole story, but I thought I had told a version of a story, so it was a kind of a series. It wasn't intended to be, an ongoing thing. And I also discovered that, to some degree, what am I good at? Well, since the very beginning, whether I'm good or bad, I've been a writer, been from I was 19 or 20, that's what I like every day. So I think I find I need to focus. In particular, I was wanting to work on the book, and I said, well, what am I best at? And I think it's the writing. So that's more where I'm going to continue to focus.
Yeah.
So it's unlikely. I mean, you can never say no, but that would be, stick to what your hat is in the brust.
Well, I'm glad that you did it, because I found you, and I should have known about you, because a number of our people have been interviewed by you already, and somehow there's so much going on in this world, it just went over the top of the head.
What can be next door to you don't know any more, because there's so much going on, but yeah, it's hard, isn't it, to get the word out and to get people to know. But what you're doing is fantastic. All we can do is try and spread the word. Yeah.
And that brings me neatly to the next question. You've been in so many countries looking at so many different mining scenarios. What do you think drives change? Is it the people on the ground? Is it government legislation? What?
It's only the people on the ground. I mean, the governments in most countries get emailed in their policies from the mining companies. The governments are owned by the mining companies. That's the reality. And even if they're not technically owned, once the mining company can say, I can give you growth, I can give you 5 years of jobs, anything for I'll destroy the Sperrins for 5,000 years if I can get 10 years of jobs. That's the type of politicians we have. That's their model of thinking. That's how far they see ahead. So the only protection is the community.
Okay.
Well, and then the politicians say, the community is moving. I better get out ahead of the community and pretend I'm now the leader again. Because that's the politicians are clever enough, and of course some of them are decent, but they're into this growth debt cult that dare they say a word against progress and innovation and all those sorts of things. So there's maybe half politicians that are half good and silent, but if they see the community moving, that'll give them courage. But do not be expecting anything from the Irish government or the European Union. They'll, because they're under pressure now to mine critical metals in Europe. So as the dependencies because of the Russian war and stuff like that. So there's a big political drive to mine in Europe again. Yeah. So we're going to see a lot more communities needing to get active to protect their local environments.
Yeah, I agree with you, and it also comes back. The European Union is being forced to mine within Europe now because of American tariffs and so on, and that story is still there of the growth, going for growth. I can just imagine someone with a suit sitting in the European Parliament thinking about health and well-being, economy, and perhaps sort of agreeing with it on the quiet, but been gagged really by their countries or the parties that put them into leadership and into power, and it just seems like a self-sustaining structure, and it's very difficult to dismantle that. To create a different narrative, really, is what I'm saying. Yeah.
Well, I think, Marella, we won't dismantle. It'll crash. And I think the issue is what happens after. I think we'll have multiple crashes.
Okay.
And it's to have something after the crash. So we'll have a crash, and then there'll be a moment of decision or whatever, and we'll either double down. And there's a very good chance of that, because that's what's happening in the United States. They're doubling down on the harms, trebling down on the harms, or else we can stand back. But at that moment, to say, well, here's a model, here's another model, degrowth or whatever, here's a different way. So we need to do the hard thinking now and the developing policy that says, here's a different way of living.
Yeah.
That is sustainable.
Yeah.
But this sort of idea that we can have it all and change, that's not going to work. The future is going to be a lot harder. There's going to be a lot less conveniences. We won't have big cars. We won't have our individual computers. We won't have these things are a historical blip. So anyone who tells you we can go green and go solar and keep it all, no, that's not going to happen. And unfortunately, people don't want to hear this. So the politicians have said to me, the people don't want to listen.
Yeah.
So right now they don't. So it's a lot of hard conversations we need to have with our brothers and our sisters and our cousins that tell them, just think about like this isn't going to last.
Yeah.
And if you really want a future for your grandchildren, you really need to start thinking about these things, because all these promises that you're giving, they're not going to last. This lifestyle is not going to last.
Yeah. And we know it. We just need to get that story out there.
And it's a thankless, difficult, hard job. But I mean, it's what do you do? You do your best.
Yeah, keep on keeping on.
Yeah.
Gerry, as someone who's connected with so many voices, is there anyone you would recommend we speak to for a future episode of this podcast?
I mentioned earlier Josh Lebowski. There's a wonderful woman that does mining collapses. I think her name is Jan Morell.
Jan Morell.
I'll find her name.
If you could send me over the details of those two folk.
I don't know if you've had Professor Emmerman on.
No, we will have him on. I haven't had him on yet. He's great.
But Jan Morell has done a load of stuff on mining dumps.
Right. Okay.
She's a brilliant person in the process, and Tom Murphy, who he is an astrophysicist in the University of California.
Okay.
He didn't. I spoke to him there a while ago. I don't think he knows his Irish connections much more. It sounds very Irish with that name, but he's a fascinating guy on the broader picture of, societal sustainability and civilization collapse. So he's an absolutely fascinating guy as well.
Okay, that's great. That's 3. That's brilliant. So if you send them over afterwards, how I could contact them, that'd be really great.
Yeah.
Before we finish, I'd like to ask you a question I ask many of my guests. Working in this field exposes you to a lot of difficult realities. What helps you keep going, and what gives you hope at this moment?
I think to some degree, Samuel Beckett once said, "I can't go on, I won't go on, I'll go." And I think there's an inbuilt thing in Irish culture. My mother went, and her sisters and brothers went to school in their bare feet. We're not that far away from, hard times and hardship. I mean, the younger generations don't remember, but there is a resilience in Irish culture that I've found inspiring, and a sense of resistance, and so I kind of, to some degree, you almost need to operate without hope to some degree, but a dogged type of resistance. I remember once a story always sticks in my head. I don't really know why. Well, it was very important. O'Donovan Rossa was in prison, and there was this big hobnob from either the government who wanted to see him, because he was even famous. This, I don't know, 1880s, 1890s. So anyway, the governor of the prison brings this big politician or whatever around the prison. Finally he comes to O'Donovan Ross's cell, and O'Donovan Ross is huddling over in the corner of the cell in the dark, and so they lean in between the bars and say, "Come over here, O'Donovan, so-and-so wants to see you," because he knew this guy was coming, right? So over shoots O'Donovan Ross with his bucket of slop and throws it over the two of them. And I thought, I'd like to be that type of person, to some degree, that knowing that you're just going to get a horrible beating or a time, you still resist. And there was an Indigenous person I met in Brazil, and I had a long, good chat with, and at the end I said, what's your future? And what future do you see? And he just looked at me and he says, resistance. And I thought, if I can find that the slow energy just to resist without needing to hope. Hope is a luxury. But if we can get up and keep doing it even without hope, that's an incredible, just that dogged putting one foot in front of the other, writing this article that you think really won't make a difference, but you never know. Like I thought that, for quite a while, that After the Goldrush, I says, why did I put so much work into that, and nobody's heard it, and it never be any good. But over the last year or so, you got in touch, others got in touch, the filmmakers got in touch, so it obviously did make some difference. But when I was doing it, there was a voice inside my head saying, what are you wasting all this time on, doing this for? So it's overcoming that voice. And just somehow keeping on and meeting people like yourself, because it is meeting the other resistors. Even if it's 1 in 10,000, I prefer to stand with the 1 than the 10,000.
It feeds the soul. Just for our listeners, can you give me 2 lines on who O'Donovan Rossa is? Because we have people listen to us from across the world.
This is testing my hits, because it's a long time I read it, but I think he was in the Fenians, and he was a tremendously inspirational liberationist type of figure, and one of the triggers that really got the momentum going for the 1916 Rising, which led to at least part of Irish independence was Pádraig Pearse's oration at the graveside of Donerarossa. I used to be able to recite that by heart, but that was many years ago. But he was a resistance. He was a person of resistance.
Okay.
And he stood up for justice. And
okay.
when it was and spent a lot of his time in jail, a bit like Nelson Mandela, in futile resistance that wasn't so futile in the end. In his lifetime, he didn't see anything, but he sowed some seeds.
Yeah, okay.
And I think that's a key thing as well. Sorry, I keep going on.
No.
With some other Indigenous people that said one of the most important things is to think of this as intergenerational. This is not something that you will have a victory in 5 or 10, 15 years. The victory, even if it comes, may take 200 years. But what you should look on is that you pass on something to the next generation so that they can keep going in the resistance. So thinking intergenerationally rather than, if I don't see a result in 2 or 3 years, I'm going to give up. Like, as far as I'm concerned, I'm in this until I drop.
Yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
That I'm not going to stop. I'm just going to keep going.
On that note of sowing seeds and working intergenerationally, Gerry McGovern, thank you for sharing your insights and for reminding us that the story of mining is inseparable from climate and all that's ahead of us. Your work continues to open up conversations that many would rather keep hidden, from the so-called green metals to the gold mining plans here for the Sperrins. It's been a real privilege to hear from you today, and we'll be watching with great interest for the release of your upcoming book. Thank you, Gerry.
Thank you, Morelli. A privilege from my side.
That's us at the end of today's chat with Gerry. Gerry's made it clear that waste, whether it's digital clutter or the scars left by mining, doesn't just happen by accident. It's baked into a system that takes and takes, leaving people and places to deal with the damage. Here in the Sperrins, and in so many places around the world, that system has been resisted. It's parents, children, grandchildren, all standing together. And sometimes hope feels like a fragile thing. But when we stand by side, we find the strength to keep going. Gerry, thank you for bringing your insight and straight talking clarity to this conversation. It really helps us see the bigger picture of what we're up against. And to you listening, thanks for being part of this journey with us. At the heart of it all, the struggle is nothing less than the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the soil that feeds us. And together, we hold the line. You've been listening to the Save Our Sperrins podcast, Voices from the Frontline. Thank you for joining us today. All the links you'll need, from campaign updates to our social media pages, as well as links shared by today's guests and resources mentioned in the conversation, are available in the show notes. Please take a moment to share this podcast with friends, neighbours, or anyone who cares about protecting our land and communities. And don't forget to hit the follow button on your podcast platform. It really helps the algorithm spread these voices further. Together, our voices are stronger. Thanks for listening, and until next time, keep standing with the land, the water, the air, and the people who protect them.